1330 WEBY, Northwest Florida's talk radio. This is Your Turn, a live call-in show featuring spirited discussion and debate about issues that matter to the community. Stay with us to hear what Northwest Florida thinks. Better yet, call in at 623-1330 and tell us what you think. It's Your Turn here on 1330 WEBY, Northwest Florida's talk radio. Now, here's the host of Your Turn.
Well, good afternoon. Bob Kerrigan, I think, sitting in for Terry Gross, usually on Wednesday, is he? So he's not here, and I'll be with you today. Normally, when I substitute for Brother Bates, the title of the show is Truth Tuesday. And so many of you are anxiously waiting for just a ray of truth, just a light, a beacon on the horizon to help you navigate through the right wing to the center, to the truth, to moderation. And I usually provide that and have a lot of people calling and offering their views about it, and we encourage you to do that today. However, I will not be proclaiming truth today. We're going to do that through one of our guests who will be with me shortly. And we're going to talk about the School of Americas, one of the black eyes on this country that was responsible for the training of so many people in Central and South America that engaged in the most horrendous human rights violations. Massive protests against the School of Americas. They've renamed it now, but they haven't redone it. And we'll have Maria Luisa Rosal with us before too long, and we're going to talk to her. Visiting with us today, a tragic story of her own dad among the disappeared in Guatemala. And we'll look forward to talking to her at length about what these folks are doing to try to bring some light to the American public about what's going on right here in this country, in the training of people, the continued training of people, training in many things, including torture and other problems. So, other things that they have done. But before we get to them, all right, we're going to go to the phones now and talk to Maria. Are you there, Maria?
Hi, yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. This is Maria Luisa Rosal. And why don't we start, Maria, with you just telling us what you do, and then we'll deal with how you got to where you are. But what do you do now?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. Well, I work out of the Washington, D.C. office for School of the Americas Watch, and I'm the new field organizer. I've been there for about 5 months now. And School of the Americas Watch is a grassroots organization that is dedicated to closing the School of the Americas, but in a larger context, changing the culture of militarism in the United States.
When you say School of America's Watch, I've always known it as School of Americas. What's it called now? So we're all talking about the same thing.
Sure. Well, the School of the Americas was actually an institute founded in 1946 in Panama, and it's a U.S. military training school for Latin American soldiers. And in 2001, after intense pressure by the grassroots and under intense pressure to Congress, it was changed to the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, WINSEC. But the school actually still has the same mission, the same instructors, the same students. And so we often say you can take away the name, but you can't take away the shame.
All right, now
the school is actually linked with some of the most egregious human rights violations in the continent.
Well, we'll get to that, and I'm well familiar with that, and we're going to ask you some questions about it. But I want to have our listeners have a better sense, first of all, of where is the School of Americas?
Well, originally it was in Panama, and in the early 1980s it was relocated to Fort Benning, Georgia, which is Columbus, Georgia. And the school still operates there, but under this new name, WINSEC, Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation.
So if we read WINSEC, we should reach the conclusion that this is just the School of Americas with a different label out in front of the school.
Absolutely, and it is funded through our U.S. tax dollars.
How big is it?
Well, currently it's about Well, it's actually on the base at Fort Benning, and it has its own campus. They're actually getting a new $28 million campus this year, and usually about 1,000 students go to the school every year, but it's costing taxpayers about $18 million a year. So that's, over the past 10 years, about $180 million.
Now, these,
in US taxes.
the 1,000 people that go through this school, are they United States military people? Are they foreign military? Are they a mix, or what are they?
No, like I said before, they're Latin American soldiers from all across the Americas. The country that sends the most soldiers to be trained at that school currently is Colombia.
And ostensibly, the Colombians are there because they're dealing with the FARC, right? I mean, that's the justification for it.
Well, one of many, yes.
And drug wars, I guess, and whatever else they do. So, United States military personnel are not there as students, but are they there as instructors or teachers?
Well, there is a mix of instructors. Some of the instructors are from Latin America themselves, and others are U.S.-born instructors. And, yeah, so it really is a mix.
And when they come here to go to the school, is there a curriculum that we could go online and read the materials or look at the textbooks or see how these people are being trained?
Well, if you do go to the website, which is, if you just Google in WinSec, you can go to their website, and you can see the courses that they do receive. And after it was reopened under the name of WinSec, there is, in fact, an 8-hour human rights course that they teach, but it's mostly, it's largely ignored, the issue of human rights at that school. And so, like I said, if you go to the course catalog, you'll see courses that range from commando operations to, trying to think here. Well, the human rights course, the 8-hour human rights course, which really is a joke. And under intense pressure in 1996, the Pentagon was forced to release their manuals that were used between 1981 and 1992, which are famously known now as the torture manuals.
Yes.
Because the course manuals did condone the use of extrajudicial killings, torture, blackmail, kidnapping, and so really put into question what this school is really teaching.
How long do the students stay there?
Well, it depends. There are several courses, and so they can stay there for a course that could be taught over 2 weeks, a couple weeks, to a few months. A lot of the students can also stay there in 1 year and go back repeatedly. There are many graduates who have gone back 2, 3, 4 times, and actually, after graduating, go back as instructors as well.
So we have the torture manuals from, I think you said 81 to 92. Is that the time period that was involved?
Yeah, and actually it was from 1982 to 1991. Sorry, and the Pentagon did release them in 1996 under intense pressure and through FOIA and declassification processes.
When they released it in 1996, did they say they were still using the same manuals, or did they say we've seen the light and we've cleaned everything up and now we're teaching human rights and caring for our fellow man, and or what did they say?
Not at all. Actually, for many years they denied that these sorts of things were actually being taught there, and through the declassification process, we were able to see what was really being taught through these courses. And this is important because Latin America during the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and even today, but specifically during the Cold War period, the whole region was plagued with massive human rights violations. The school is linked with, as I said, the worst human rights violations, including extrajudicial killings, massacres, disappearances, torture.
So what are they teaching now, if you know?
Well, interestingly, after the school reopened in 2001, beginning in 2004, the names of the soldiers began to became classified again. And so we actually don't have the names of the graduates that are coming out of that school anymore. which is problematic for many reasons, primarily because we can't link them to whatever it is they're doing when they return back to their country. So there's really no tracking of these soldiers, including police. And but we do believe that they are still receiving the same courses, just under a different name.
Okay, Maria, we're going to put you on hold because we have to take commercial breaks. I'm sure you know how all of that works. I want to tell our listeners that they are listening to Maria Luisa Rosal and can find out more about the the School of America's Watch. If you go to School of America's Watch, SOAW.org. And we'll have Maria back here after this short break.
Now, back to your turn on 1330 WEBY, Northwest Florida's talk radio. The phone lines are open, so call in and join the conversation at 623-1330.
Well, good afternoon. Bob Kerrigan sitting in here as a guest host today, and my great pleasure to talk to Maria Luisa Rosal. I'm going to put you back on, Maria, but before I do, I want to tell our listeners, both here locally and many now that I understand are listening via the streaming of this broadcast, that you can go to SOAW.org, School of America's Watch.org. And I'm on that site right now, and there's just lots of really good information. Maria was talking about the release of these torture manuals in September of 1996. There's very interesting information here about Dick Cheney and some other things that you, I think, will find interesting. So, Maria, are you back with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Thank you very much. Before we took a break, we were talking about what's going on inside the School of Americas. Why, and this is a rhetorical question, really, but why does the United States government not disclose their normal military training materials that we're training foreign citizens to implement certain conduct in the countries that they come from? What is the legal reason? Is it a security concern, or what do they facially say is the reason that they won't release these manuals when they've released the other manuals years ago?
Well, what we're actually saying that they need to be releasing are actually the names of the graduates. They did release the manuals in 1996, and to be clear on one thing, that the school was actually opened specifically to combat the spread of communism. That was the sort of the
correct
the excuse for why it opened, and even in this post-Cold War era, the school is still open, and now it's under a different pretext of countering the drug war, against terrorism, etc. And the pressure to declassify the names, and I'd be happy to talk about that later on specifically, is very important to the work that we do. To date, no independent investigation into the training facility has ever taken place, which is very problematic because not only are we spending so much money on a school, but a school that doesn't do any tracking of its students is very problematic.
Yeah, I would think so. But I am puzzled by this. The Soviet Union essentially went out of business. The Soviet bloc of nations went out of business in 1992. And communism, as a perceived threat which had justified all kinds of wars and killings and other things over the history of our fight against communism, what was the justification for continuing the school from 1992 on?
Like I said, the school, even though it was opened under one reason, which is communism, it now is under the guise of counter-narcotics, the war on terror, and we're convinced at the School of the Americas Watch that the school has always had one sole purpose, and that's to control the economic and political systems in Latin America, the groups that have traditionally held power and those most affected by these policies are the same people. They are organizers, educators, religious workers, peasants, women, children, by and large, and basically anyone who opposes repressive government.
Well, we don't really know, because they won't tell us, what countries are sending the most people, correct? Or do we know?
We do know what countries are sending troops, and we do know the numbers that are being sent from each country. What we don't know are the names of those being sent and those graduating. And that's why we know that Colombia, for example, is the country that sends the most troops, which under this new war on drugs, it's no surprise that it's the country that sends the most troops.
Tell us who else sends a fair number of people to the School of Americas. What other countries?
Well, every country sends troops there. There are 6 countries that have sort of said no to the United States and begun to assert their sovereignty and their self-determination, and they have said we are no longer going to send troops to that school, and that was beginning in 2004 with Venezuela, 2006 with Uruguay and Argentina. Later following them is Bolivia, and most recently in 2012, Nicaragua and Ecuador. So those 6 countries have said no more to sending troops there.
Do you see that increasing, the number of countries who are refusing to participate in the School of Americas?
Well, we hope so. It's a strategy that began in 2004 when our founder, Father Roy Bourgeois, and Latin America coordinator Lisa Sullivan were in Venezuela to sort of see about a new strategy from the South, thinking that maybe if they could talk to the leaders of these countries, they would stop sending students. And if there are no more students, there can be no more schools like this. And they traveled to 18, 19 countries, and to date, 6 countries have pulled out. And so it has been a very interesting strategy, and a strategy that really has been based on solidarity and really looking at the South for leadership in this movement as well.
I don't know if I ever mentioned this to you, but I met with and spent some time with Lisa Sullivan in Venezuela. It's been a number of years ago, and it was fascinating to talk to her about the work that she was doing. Have these 6 countries, certainly Venezuela is probably one of the earliest ones, but the 6 countries that you've named, what was the last one that came on board?
Both Ecuador and Nicaragua in 2012.
Okay, I'm talking to Maria Luisa Rosal. Now, we have to take a mid-station break here, Maria, for about 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask you to stay on hold, and we're going to pick this up when we return. Maria Luisa Rosal, and stand by. We'll be back.
Now, back to your turn on 1330 WEBY, Northwest Florida's talk radio. The phone lines are open, so call in and join the conversation at 623-1330.
Well, good afternoon. Bob Kerrigan sitting in today as a guest host, and thanking WEBY for making this 2-hour block available for people to express their opinions, regardless of your political views. They are welcome. And it's good quality debate, I think, that we have from time to time. In the second hour, we're going to take callers who might be interested in talking about the School of Americas and the School of Americas Watch and what's going on there. But right now, we're talking to Maria. And Maria, you're back, I hope.
Yes, here I am.
Okay, good. Let's leave the School of Americas and watch it in your official position for a minute, and let's just talk about your background, what you did, what your educational achievements are, which are impressive, and to tell us your personal story of how you became involved in this.
Sure. Well, I'm from Guatemala. I was born during the height of the internal armed conflict. That was a conflict that lasted between 1960 and 1996. And I was born at the height of that period in 1982. I say the height of the internal armed conflict because that was when you see massive scorched earth campaigns is what they were called. And under this policy of the national security doctrine, targeting the internal enemy, anybody that was considered to be subversive. And those who were subversive were deemed as communists. Most of the subversives, or, quote, I put that in quotes, were labor activists, were human rights defenders. Yes, there was an insurgency movement in Guatemala, but those most affected, again, were peasants, were students, were professors at the university. And by the end of the conflict, the death toll was over 200,000, with 45,000 disappeared, 1 million internally displaced. This can all be seen in the Historical Clarification Commission report, which was UN-sponsored. It's called Memory of Silence. And it also, in it, identifies the U.S. School of the Americas as one of the training centers for many who committed the human rights atrocities. 93% of the human rights violations were committed by the Army during this period. And also in 1983, my father was one of the 45,000 disappeared in my country. My mother searched for him until we were forced to leave as well. We came to the United States, as did many other Central Americans during this period. Just the percentage of Central Americans in the United States actually exploded during this time. Not only was there an internal armed conflict in Guatemala, there was a civil war that lasted 12 years in El Salvador. There were human rights violations being committed in Honduras, and just the U.S. foreign policy in Central America as its backyard was just decimating the civilian population.
The 45,000 people that you spoke of, including your father, did that? What percentage of the population of Guatemala was that?
The population at this time is probably about, I would say, 8 million. Guatemala is about the size of the state of Tennessee, just to kind of put it in perspective. It is the largest country in Central America, but the policies were very repressive, and many who were overseeing many of the operations, including today's president, General Otto Pérez Molina, he oversaw many of the massacres taking place in the northern highlands of Quiché. He's a School of the Americas graduate as well.
The 45,000 people just in Guatemala, did that include the people that were killed, the residents and citizens of Guatemala that were killed?
No, this is a number aside from the 200,000. And these numbers are actually quite conservative because a lot of those that were killed or disappeared, the bodies have not been able to be located. Many people who were lost in the forced displacement. These are I say they're conservative estimates because the work of the commission, the numbers had to be basically identifiable, names, bodies, through testimonies, etc.
The president of Guatemala was a former general, was he, in the Guatemalan army?
Yes, he was, and as I said, he's an SOA grad. During the height of the repression, the dictator who was in power was General Efraín Ríos Montt, who was in power for 18 months. During that 18 months, throughout the 36-year period during the internal armed conflict, he alone was responsible for, basically under his rule, under those 18 months, more than 80% of the human rights atrocities that were committed during the entire 36-year conflict were committed during that period.
Let's just talk about Guatemala for a minute. We can jump across and around Central America, but has there ever been a truth commission or an accountability of any of the people involved in this mass killing and disappeared of Guatemala?
Well, a few things. There have been 2 Truth Commission reports. One was an official Truth Commission under the auspice of the United Nations. It was the result of one of the accords in the peace accord process, and that commission published their report in February 1999, and it's called The Memory of Silence, and that's where most of the numbers that we use now in a lot of academic research comes from, because before there wasn't as systematic of documentation for these violations.
Tell us the name of the Truth Commission report again, Sor.
It's the UN-sponsored Truth Commission report. It's called, well, in Spanish it's called Memoria del Silencio, the Memory of Silence, and that was given to the public in February of 1999.
And you said there was a second Truth Commission?
Yes. There were certain limitations to that Truth Commission, and as opposed to the Truth Commission report that was published in El Salvador just a few years prior, the Guatemalan Truth Commission report could not name those responsible for the human rights violations. Those names are actually basically stored for 50 years. I'll probably be much older, and those who perpetrated those human rights violations will probably be dead when those names come out, I think in probably 2049, 50 years, 1999 plus 50 years.
Was this an internal legislative decision to seal this for 50 years, or was this under the auspices of the UN?
I'm not sure how that number was decided on, but what is important is that the Truth Commission report would not name those responsible for the atrocities. This was problematic for many of the victims because they wanted to have a report that would help them in the process of reconstructing their lives, their memories, and basically give them back their dignity. Many people who survived did so, but they were victims of sexual violence, especially in the case of the women, and many were looking for their loved ones still, and there was still a big culture of fear. And in the face of this, the Human Rights Office of the Archdiocese of Guatemala decided to take on the task of going through with an ad hoc Truth Commission, and that was called the Recuperation of Historical Memory in Guatemala. It was called the Nunca Más, Never Again report, and that was done through many testimonies, and that was published just prior to the official Truth Commission report in 1998. The bishop who presented the report and who oversaw the work of that commission was murdered just 2 days after this report was made public. One of the material authors of his assassination is also an SOA grad, General Lima Estrada, and we are this month on the 16th year anniversary of his death, April 26th.
The accountability of these atrocious acts, these pervasive human rights violations throughout Central and South America, has anybody been brought to justice? Has anybody been prosecuted, incarcerated, sentenced, punished in any way since this all happened?
Yes and no. The level of impunity of Guatemala is still said to be about 98% level of impunity, which means that the level of accountability is very low. The military still has a stronghold over the government of the country in general, and to date, most of the cases that have had sentences has not been in a Guatemalan court, rather at the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights through the OAS or the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. This is the case of my father. The case was brought before the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights in September of 1983, and we're still in that process today. Many of the cases that have received sentences, the Guatemalan state has not complied with many of the the recommendations of those sentences. And just last year, for the first time in the history of the world, a former head of state was put on trial for genocide, and that was General Efraín Ríos Montt, again an SOA grad. And just 10 days later, even though he was found guilty for the crime of genocide and human rights violations like disappearances, etc., he was sentenced to 80 years in prison, specifically for the genocide of the Ixil Maya communities. Over 1,700 were massacred during his rule. The sentence was annulled just 10 days later, and though the trial is set to be to reconvene in 2015, it's really not sure what's going to happen. And so this calls into question, what kind of accountability do we have in a country like Guatemala, a country where, though there are no systematic disappearances or deaths like you did have during the 1980s, 1970s, you do have a high level of impunity, and you do have much repression by the state forces and the state apparatus towards a lot of the communities that are resisting sort of the new developments like mining and the extraction of natural resources. They're defending their territory with their words, with their bodies, not with weapons, and they are being criminalized, they are being considered terrorists, and they are being murdered as well.
The President Monte, is that how you pronounce his last name, or Montt?
Ríos Montt, yes.
Ríos Montt. His trial, if it continues in 2015, he'll be, 80-something years old?
He's well over 83, I think, right now.
Same thing happened with Pinochet, just indefinite delays, indefinite postponements, and nothing really ever happens. Maria, by the way, for those of you just joining us on via the internet or otherwise, Maria Luisa Rosal from the School of America's Watch. I just have to ask you, I guess, a personal question. Do you ever just get so frustrated and so discouraged that you just think about walking away from it and doing something else?
No, it's not really an option for me. Yes, I do get frustrated. I've had a good cry here and then, and here with my mom, with my family, with friends. But I feel even more empowered and even more. I have a stronger resolve to continue the work I'm doing. It's as I said, it's just not an option to look away. It's actually impossible. I don't know even how I would do that. The disappearance of my father, though I was 8 months at the time of his disappearance, my mother was 3 months pregnant with my brother, who has the same name as my father. They're both named Jorge Alberto. It's something I think about every day of my life. It's something that, and I think I speak for many families who have had disappearances in their families.
It's probably the worst.
Families who have had somebody been disappeared, there is an absence that's always present, and you never ever have closure. And I think that's one of the worst things about a forced disappearance. And they say it's really the crime of all crimes, because you strip a person of their entire personhood as well.
Enormously stressful for the family and for everybody else. And I'm going to ask Maria to stay with us. We're going to take a short break here, but I would just conclude this segment of our discussion by saying, as a country, we cannot forget this. We have to keep pressing on, and the citizens have to keep asking questions. How in the world did we come to the point that we participated as a nation in the killing and maiming and torture? And we did directly participate in it, as unpleasant as that is to talk about. We'll take a short break and we'll be back, Maria, so stay with us.
Now, back to your turn on 1330 WEBY, Northwest Florida's talk radio. The phone lines are open, so call in and join the conversation at 623-1330.
Welcome back. Bob Kerrigan sitting in today, and we're talking with Maria Luisa Rosal from the School of America's Watch. And I'm going to go back to Maria and ask you a quick 2 or 3 questions as we close out this first hour. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Maria, the thought occurred to me as you were speaking, surely there have to be a number of defectors who have gone through the School of Americas, understood what happened to them, understood that they were advancing the political interest of the empowered group at the time, wherever they were going back to, and must have had some kind of second thoughts or whatever. How many of those people have we heard from, if any?
I'm not so sure. I'm not sure about the number of defectors that have received courses at the School of the Americas. However, there have been many instructors who have come out and spoken against the school, including a former instructor, Major Joseph Blair, who's from the United States. And, and I quote him, he said in 2006, the hope is that close personal contacts developed at Fort Benning will result in future U.S. potential to influence Latin American governments, which are most often dominated by present and former elitists of military regimes and dictatorships. So many instructors have actually come out to speak about what the true nature of the school is, and also just in the news. Well, not so much in the mainstream media, but in the news, there have been reports of a lot of instructors and graduates who are being linked, even in the face of the classification of the names, to human rights violations today. A lot of people would say that, the atrocities committed at the SOA, now called WINSEC, were things of the past. And that's not the case. We have documents upon documents that kind of speak to the contrary, that it's not something of the past, it's something that continues, and for that reason, we often say in the movement that schools like the SOA are not aberrations of U.S. foreign policy, but clear examples of U.S. foreign policy in Latin America.
Well, you can find out more about the School of America's Watch by going to soaw.org and go on the site. There are news items and action items and resources and good discussions that for those of you who are interested in this subject. As I recall, annually, the protest of the School of Americas takes place, maybe more than annual. I can't remember if it is. I always see the note of the annual protest. Well, what's that all about?
So the November Vigil with the School of the Americas Watch movement, it was begun really in 1990, and it began with just 9 fasters, including Father Roy Bourgeois, and it's grown over tens of thousands over the past years to now. And to date, it's the largest anti-militarization movement. We do a convergence at the gates of Fort Benning always the weekend before Thanksgiving to commemorate the anniversary of the murder of the Jesuits in the University of Central America in San Salvador, and that was on November 16th of 1989. 19 of the 26 responsible for their murder were SOA grads. And, I mean, the list goes on with all the atrocities that happened in just El Salvador, not to mention the rest of Latin America.
These were 6 young Jesuit young men, priests. Were they? I'm not sure if they were priests or lay people in the church, but they were just at a meeting, right?
They were 6 Jesuit priests, and also their housekeeper and her teenage daughter, so Selena and Alba Ramos, they were murdered as well. And not only that, but just 9 years prior, Monsignor Romero, who is the Archbishop of El Salvador, he was murdered by 2 SOA grads, 2 of the 3 responsible for his death. And just months later, and I understand that this is a case that you are very closely involved with. In December of 1980, 4 church women were raped and murdered.
Indeed, and Oscar Romero's death is one of the great tragedies, one of the most powerful, courageous people you could ever read about. Thank you so much for being with us, Maria. We're going to have to go to our break, and we'll see you tonight at the library in Pensacola and Government in Spring.